So we have Alan Zundel and Mark Frohmeyer here. The last time they were here, they were on opposite sides. Not quite opposite. They both wanted change in our election voting systems, but they weren't on the same page. This time, they've got together, and it sounds like they've come to an agreement, and they're working on an initiative, and it's called Star Voting. And please come up and tell us about that, Alan and Mark. Thank you. Let's give them a round welcome applause. Or Howard.
All right, again, I'm Alan Zundel. I'm here with Mark Frohmeyer, and we're here to tell you about an initiative campaign to bring star voting to Lane County elections. That's the elections for Lane County officers. We're hoping to get this on the ballot in November of 2018, and if it passes, it means that when we elect county commissioners and other county offices in the future, they'll be elected using this new method. As James said, last time Mark and I were here together was about a year ago. I don't remember exactly when, but I didn't see it as we were on opposite sides of this. I saw it more as an informational presentation on both ranked choice voting and what was then called score runoff voting, because at the time I didn't know enough about what we're now calling star voting to have an opinion pro or con about it. So I thought there was an opportunity just to update everybody on ranked choice voting and how we had a measure passed in Benton County, what kind of plans we might have, and then allow Mark to talk about this more recently developed concept of star voting, which I have subsequently spent a lot of time looking into, and I've come to the opinion that it actually has a lot of advantages over ranked choice voting. Even though it's not as well known, I think it would work better than ranked choice voting, so that's why I got behind this and decided to become a co-petitioner along with Mark to bring this to Lane County. Now, this group, by the way, I really thank the people who have stepped up to keep this group running, because I've been here a lot. Yeah, go ahead, let's hear some applause to them. I come fairly frequently to hear the public presentations on issues that are going on in our community. I think that's a great service. You can't find that in too many places. So again, I thank you all who have been serving, and encourage those of you who have thought, no, I can't do this, maybe you can give it a second thought and help out, because they do need a lot of help. Now, before you ask me if I'm going to help, I got my hands full with this star voting campaign and a few other things. So this group, next year, is probably going to be approached by different candidates for endorsement in the elections. And you're going to face a dilemma that we all face as voters, which is, should we endorse somebody based on how likely they are to be able to win, or how closely they are aligned with our values?
Yeah.
That's a dilemma that we always face at one time or another when we go into the voting booth in one race or another. There may be a candidate who's a third-party candidate or an independent, or just some kind of, in a primary campaign, somebody without the money or the name support, that you say, boy, this person is really closely aligned to my values. And the kind of policies they're supporting are things that I think are good and I'd like to see happen. On the other hand, this other person seems to have a much better chance of winning. They're not quite closely as aligned with my ideas as the one who has less of a chance, but they're a heck of a lot better than this one over here. Okay, I won't mention any names, but they're candidates that we don't want to see elected, so we vote for somebody we don't like as much, hoping to defeat somebody, and we end up getting not what we really want. It happens over and over. And on the side of a candidate making decisions about whether to run or not, or how to run, they face that same dilemma. You know, I have some good ideas. I don't think these ideas are being aired by the candidates that are out there. Should I step up? Well, is anybody going to vote for me if they're afraid I'm going to throw the race to somebody else? And I'm sure this was going through Bernie Sanders' mind when he was considering running for president. In fact, I can think of two big decisions he faced that were very difficult, I'm sure. The first one, a number of ones, I'm sure, but these two stick out in my mind, is when he decided at first he was going to run, would he run as he had been for decades as an independent, or would he run as a Democrat? And he faced that same dilemma. If I run as an independent, it's possible that I'll take away votes in the general election from the Democrat, and the Democrat will probably be better than the Republican, so what do? So he decided to run for the Democratic nomination. The other choice he faced is when it became clear that he wasn't going to win the nomination, and he had to decide on how vocally he was going to support the candidate Hillary Clinton. Now, he just spent months telling people why she was not the best candidate for the job, and now he had to turn around and support her because the alternative was, you know, if I pick somebody else. For me, I'm a member of the Green Party, and I voted for Jill Stein because it's not a plug for Jill Stein of the Green Party, but they are more closely aligned with my values. But I'm sure a lot of other people, particularly in states where there was close margins between the two candidates, they're thinking, I can vote for somebody I like, but they don't have much of a chance of winning, and it's likely to vote, to cast the vote, to end up electing somebody I don't want, who actually did win. And that's something we're all dealing with right now, is how our voting system forces us into these horrible choices. And I could go into depth on why that is, but let me just give you the primary reason that we have such an awful voting system is because it gives you such a restricted way of expressing what you want. Yep. All you get to say is, which one of these will you say yes to, and it's no for everybody else. Okay? What if you had a voting system where you were able to say, I like this one a lot, but if they're not going to make it, I would like this one next. Or, I hate this one, I don't want to see them at all, but there's several, I prefer this one, maybe that one next, maybe this one next, maybe these two I like just as much as each other. If you could express your opinion without worrying about how it was going to throw the race to somebody you don't like, the lesser of two evils versus the greater of two evils is still a choice between evils.
That's right, yes. I don't vote for evil. That's right.
You don't vote for evil. Well, you don't vote very often then. Because the choices are usually pretty bad, and that's because everybody who's running for office knows about this dilemma, so a lot of people don't even step up to the plate. They figure, I don't have the connections, I don't have the name, gathering money is going to compromise me, so why run? It's going to be between the Democrat and the Republican, and the ones who are going to get the nominations are the ones who already have connections, so why bother? So we end up with a really restricted choice of people who are connected, can get the money, and don't necessarily represent the people, especially in an age where we see the money flowing so high up on the scale, and those people just want more and more, it seems, and we're getting less and less all the time. I don't want to go into too big a commercial about all my political views. What I'm here to talk about is voting, though. So this is why I got behind the campaign for Star Voting, because it allows you to express what you really think about each candidate without worrying about some kind of strategic after effects that are going to give you something different. As far as I've been able to judge, it's very hard, maybe impossible, to game this system without having it fall back on you. So the best thing in this system is to give an honest vote. Who do you really like? How much do you really like them? And how do you rate all the other candidates? Okay? I'm going to ask Mark now to step up and talk about Star Voting and explain how it works to you. And then we'll stick around and answer whatever questions you have for as long as we have the time to do that. Okay? Thanks for listening. Mark?
Good morning, everybody. My voice is not entirely with me today, but I'll do the best I can. So a year ago when we came here, we were talking about a system that we called score runoff voting. And over the last year, it got renamed to Star Voting. And Star simply stands for score, then automatic runoff, STAR. And the entire system is encapsulated within that name. So, like if you're doing a product review on Amazon, or rating a song, or judging an Olympic candidate, if anyone here is an Olympic judge, you score the candidates on the ballot, like 0 to 5. 5 means I really like that candidate. That's the I'm giving that candidate full support. 0 means I am giving that candidate no support. And any of the numbers in between mean I'm giving them some level of support between 0 and 5. It's like that is scoring. Is anyone here familiar with scoring as a notion? Anyone? Everyone? Has everyone gotten a grade on a paper or, attributed some independent measure of value to things? So the key element of star voting is that you get to look at each candidate individually. You're not sorting them according to which one you like the most, first choice, second choice, third choice, fourth choice, whatever. You can look at each one and say, 0 to 5, do I want to offer them full support, 1/5 support, 0 support, 2/5 support? And then the little twist that ends up being a really key feature is the then automatic runoff part. So instead of just electing whichever candidate got the highest score overall, it actually looks at the top 2 scoring candidates and says, between the 2 highest scoring candidates, which one did more voters express a preference for? So the 2 highest scorers go to this automatic runoff, and then the system looks back at your ballot and says, did you give a higher score to one or the other? And your full vote goes to whichever one you gave the highest score. If you gave them both the same score, well, then you're essentially expressing no preference between the 2. You gave them the same score. And so that's literally the full system. It's score, then automatic runoff. So when you see the results, you'll see a tally of scores. The top scoring candidate got a 4.6 on average, 4.4, 4.2, 3.0. And then between the 2 highest scorers, there'll be a preference check to say which one did more voters actually prefer.
In the initial process, when you mark your ballot, if you give 2 candidates that you like the most equal scores, like both get a 5, then if those candidates, all the votes of all the people, they get the most votes and they won't go to the automatic runoff, have you neutralized your vote then by giving them in that runoff?
What you've basically said is I'm going to be equally happy with these 2. So if you give 2 candidates the highest score, and both of them make the runoff, then you've won as a voter, right?
Okay. What I'm thinking of is if, I guess you're right, that does take care of it. Never mind.
Right. So, but it's a great question. The idea is that because you really have 6 different levels that you can put each candidate on, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so that's enough that even if you have 20 candidates running, there might be 3 5s in your field, and if both of those make it to the runoff, you're like, hey, I as a voter, you won. And then you're basically leaving it to people who actually have a preference difference between the 2 to make that final decision. But if you just think about it, you can go, okay, well, versus picking one candidate on the ballot, my favorite, or whichever one I think has a chance to win on my side, who's raised the most money, to actually be able to express whatever level of opinion you want on everyone who's running. I mean, you don't have to score everybody. If you just like one candidate, you can give that one candidate a 5 and move on. And then it looks exactly like the way that we vote now. But if there are a handful of candidates that you have, some level of appreciation for, you can actually express that on the ballot. And what it does from kind of a democracy perspective is a couple of things. One, it actually lets us all vote equally. So on every candidate, if you give a candidate a 5, I can give that same candidate a 0. If you give a candidate a 3, I can give the candidate a 2. No matter how you express yourself, there's another way that I can express myself that shows that we all have the same power. The way we vote now, if there are 2 candidates that you like and I like just one, I actually have twice as much voting power as you do, because everyone who thinks like you is going to divide their votes between those two candidates. And everyone who thinks like me will concentrate our votes on the one candidate that we like. And this is basically what Alan was alluding to, is that the more, in our current system, it really diminishes participation for candidates. Because if there's somebody else running that is kind of like your point of view, you're like, well, I like most of the things about this other person, but there's some areas where I think I could add a meaningful voice. If you are at all worried that somebody on the other side is going to win, then as a candidate, you will not run. And so voters get very limited choices today. People are dissuaded from participating if there are other people who are trying to go for the same job. And then we have this incredibly long period of time to make the choice, because we vote twice. We vote once in the spring on a slate of candidates, and then for nonpartisan races, if nobody gets 50% in that first vote, we vote again in November. And if you remember, like City Council, Ward 1, Emily Semple and Josh Scove, and Chris Wigg, they ran in the spring, and then they had to run again in November for a job that is thankless and, takes a ton of time. They actually had to work for a year to get that job, and that's true of every nonpartisan race and every partisan race as well. So one of the other major advantages with star voting is that you only need to make the choice once. You can express yourself one time in November in the general election, and candidates don't have to spend a year fighting for a local job, which is insane. So I'm going to just open it up to questions at this point. And Alan, if you want to come back up, you're welcome to join.
Sage had her hand up for quite a
Oh,
while.
I think she was first.
Really?
Yeah, mine's more a follow-up.
Okay, so this idea isn't new. It's been out there for a while. And how are we going to get that process through? Is it going to be a Congress decision, or how are we going to make that happen? And also, I'd like to see all candidates that are up for, since all the third parties never get recognition, to eliminate the unlimited campaign spending, that every candidate work on a budget just like we do. Everybody gets the same amount of money, and they try to figure out how to make that money work within their budget.
So there were a couple of questions in that question. To the first one, scoring is obviously not new, right? It's been around forever. Runoffs are not new. They've been around forever. This combination of scoring and then an automatic runoff based on how you express your scores, that's what is new. It's that combination that's never been tried before. So we submitted a ballot measure in the middle of, it was like 2 weeks ago or something. Several iterations. So like end of November, we submitted a county ballot measure. And again, this is just at the local level, which is where we're starting. So ultimately, we think it could apply to many different offices, but we're starting here in Lane County at the county level. There's actually a parallel measure running in Portland for Multnomah County. And they made these campaign flyers up there, and so we're able to actually share some resources and collaborate, strategize and all that with the other campaign. But ultimately, we want to get it enacted, just for the local county offices, and make sure that people actually like it at the local level, and then promote it potentially statewide, potentially to other states. You could certainly see it building. And while, to the point on campaign finance reform, every ballot measure is limited to a single subject. So it has to be on one topic. So we couldn't do something that was both about campaign finance reform and about election process reform. But changing to star voting should have a dramatic effect on campaign finance, in the sense that right now we are strongly incentivized to cast our vote for someone who's raised a lot of money, right? That is the lesser evil vote, is for someone on your side who is strong, who you think has a chance to win, and all that is dictated by your perception. How much money have they raised? Which endorsements have they gotten? It's not about what do you actually think about that candidate. It's about what do you think about that candidate and that candidate's odds of actually winning. So taking that whole strategic element out of it, where you don't actually have to consider the strength of the candidate, you can actually say, this is my honest opinion about the whole field. That should have a dramatic effect on the importance of money in the political process, and certainly cutting the number of elections from 2 to 1, cutting the time of the election from 12 months to 6 months, means that candidates won't have to raise as much money, which means they're not going to have to be as beholden to those who cut checks.
I could add something.
Yes, please.
This is not only a question of how you can kill two birds with one stone, both make it easier for people to win and reduce the influence of money, but it's the key to changing a lot of other policies as well. Because if you look at the last couple of decades, how much time do groups spend protesting what the government is doing instead of electing people in the first place who are going to do what they want them to? That's what we're faced with. We vote for people who are not quite what we want, and then we end up spending our time organizing marches and saying, okay, you didn't say you were going to do that, why are you doing that? So when you open the door first to voters to start to realize they don't have this dilemma of spoilers and they can actually look at other candidates, then you open up the door to candidates who don't have as much money or backing, and then you open up the door to hearing about different ideas and finding out if they actually have public support and introducing them into the legislature. Not only because you're electing new people, but because the people in office are realizing this person is running on that issue and it's getting a lot of support, so I better get behind that. So it makes elections what they ought to be, so we don't have to spend so much time electing people and then telling people who are in office, why are you doing what you're doing? That's not what I want.
So I'm curious, how would these votes be counted? Would there be a computer system? Would there be paper ballots? Would there be a way to make sure that it's not hacked into? It just seems a little complicated.
It would be done the same way we do it now. In Oregon, we have vote tabulation machines where you fill out your ballot at home. It's a paper ballot. You mail it in, and then they feed it through the computer, and they find out what the result is. They keep the ballots for a certain period of time in case there has to be checking or recounts. All you have to do is reprogram the computer to be able to tally up the votes and determine the winner a little bit differently. And this is a lot simpler than a lot of other proposed reforms, which have put the potential for countless rounds of counting where you kind of lose track of what is actually happening. This one is just 2 rounds all the time. Which 2 got the top scores, and then which of those 2 got more high scores than the other.
Is anyone else doing this?
No, we're the only ones, unless someone's doing it and hasn't told us.
It's the first time. I mean, this system was invented in 2000. Yeah, so this system was actually invented in 2014 here in Lane County as the result of a conference that we held called the Equal Vote Conference, and we invited some of the nation's leading reform advocates for ranked choice voting, for approval voting, for top 2 primaries, and got everybody in one room, and nobody agreed with each other. I mean, this was a room full of people who had been disagreeing with each other for a long time. But out of that discussion came the root of this idea. And then over the last 3 years, we've been just refining it and refining it and refining it. And at the same time that tons and tons of people have just been sort of taking shots at it, trying to pick it apart, trying to figure out how people would game it. And just, it's withstood a ton of scrutiny, but now it needs to be actually tried in the real world. And, you know, I mean, one could say certainly doing it at the local county level is really the appropriate place to start a new voting system idea.
So are you going to be gathering signatures?
Yes, that was, I wanted to make sure we got to that, which is that once we actually get approved to circulate the petitions, we'll need to collect, I think, on the order of 15,000 signatures in Lane County, and that's where
100 days, right?
we'll have until August 11th.
Okay.
So we'll have about 6 months, including some nice summer days, to go out and get signatures on clipboards. But gathering signatures is the classic definition of many hands make light work. If we could get 100 people, then that's 150 signatures per person. If we can get 1,000 people, it just means that each of us has to get 15. So would really hope that anyone here would be willing to at least get one signature sheet full, if not several.
Are you starting the process right now?
We're not yet qualified, so it goes through that kind of the ballot measure titling process is what's happening right now. So the county officials have come up with a proposed title, and then there's a period of time where people can say that needs to be clearer in some way, and once that's done, then we'll be able to actually go and circulate petitions.
But you can volunteer right now. She's passing around a sheet if you want to get your name on so we can contact you when we're ready to go. And if you're not ready to do that, you want to look into this more, go to online equal.vote. Okay? There's no .com or .org or anything else. It's just equal.vote. And you can read more about it. You can sign up to volunteer, find out more how to contact us if you have further questions, all that kind of stuff.
So, elections are expensive. So you're proposing that we have the primary in May, then general in November, and then if two out of say 5 candidates get the same number of 5, we're going to have a third election? Is that what's going to happen?
All in one.
Well,
Yeah.
Well, now, where are you going to cut it off?
Well-
I mean, at what percentage of the vote will you say that one person won over the other one if they're down to like half a percentage between the two? How are you going to do that?
So
My question.
in the measure itself, it says it'll be up to the county. It'll be up to county officials to determine what happens in the event of a tie. And that's the same thing that happens right now. Like if there's a tie vote, then there's a process by which, and I don't know if it's they draw lots or flip a coin or whatever.
So this is just the county that you're talking about? It's not
Yes.
For this.
To start out, we're just doing a county measure. We could easily see it going to all the statewide elections. But one of the real advantages is you don't have to have a primary now for the county elections. So today, candidates run in the primary and then they run again in the general if there's a runoff. This would just, everybody would be elected in the November election at the county level.
Basically, you're eliminating one election.
Correct.
So we're saving money.
Yes. Candidates save money, voters save mental time and anguish.
Well, the county saves money, they don't have to send out
Yep.
ballots.
I just wanted to please repeat the name of the conference in 2014 that this was invented at.
It was called the Equal Vote Conference, and it was held at the U of O Law School. I think kind of there's one other thought that got triggered there, and what was yes. What was I thinking? There's some. Well, were there any other questions in the room?
I have an example that
So I have a really good example, I think, of how the last Lane County Commissioners election could have gone differently if we had this system. We have James Barber, who's running for East Lane County Commissioner. I worked on Kevin Matthews' campaign, but I was also a fan of Joanne Ernst.
Right.
And Kevin, actually, I like both of them. Kevin had more money, right? He had way more money than everybody else, and so I started working on his campaign, figuring chances are he would win. He lost going into the runoff by 9 votes. So if we had had this system, that wouldn't have happened, and we wouldn't have had Mr. Faye Stewart, Clear Cut Stewart, as our East Lane County Commissioner. So I just think this is one of those fundamental problems that are the root of all the evils that we are experiencing right now. And until we, to stop putting out the little fire here and there, we really need to work on these fundamental issues. Otherwise, well, I don't have to tell you guys how bad things are. But I think that's a really good example.
Elections have consequences. And if you use a bad voting system, the consequences will not be good. We know that. That's what we live with every day. I think one other point that bears mentioning is that the voters who turn out in the primary are not the same as the voters who turn out in the general election. The general election is a much more representative demographic of the overall electorate versus those who are, typically more partisan. It's a different group of voters. It's a less representative group of voters who vote in the primary. So right now we're electing all of our local officials. Pretty much, a lot of those elections get decided in the primary before the election where most people turn out to vote. So this would actually just say, hey, in the election that everybody turns out to vote for, the most people turn out to vote, that's when we're actually going to make the determinative choice.
Thereby, we just basically exclude ourselves from the national election.
You're saying for if we use this for the presidential or for congressional and
every election we send up a great third-party candidate is not going to win nationally because nationally they're still in a duopoly system.
Yeah, I think we'll definitely want to consider that when we get to looking at the presidential race and how this voting system would affect kind of the race for president and the race for higher offices. Right. Oh, absolutely. Well, Bernie Sanders is a great example of an independent in Congress, so.
It seems to just work effectively that voters need to be informed. And I don't believe that voters are informed. So how do you take that into account that people may have someone want to vote for, but they see all these other names and they just start filling dots in just because they're supposed to fill it out?
I think so for me, I guess I have a lot of faith in voters. I think voters right now are given a really bad system of choice. And so for a lot of people, there's not an incentive to tune in and figure out who they really support. But ultimately, what today's system forces all of us to do is to make dumb choices. We have to often choose between the candidate we really like and the candidate we think has a chance to win. So even today, smart voters, savvy voters, people who are really tuned in, people who are paying attention, have to vote using a horrible system. And I don't think we should say we're gonna make it so that the voting system plays to our worst tendencies, right? I think that we as voters should be able to express ourselves to whatever degree we want to. And if you want to fill out your ballot randomly with a bunch of scores on all the columns, you're a voter. You're allowed to do that. You don't have to. You can read the candidate statements and you can decide which ones you like. But does that make sense at all?
It makes sense. But I know a lot of people who when it comes to an election, they vote, but they're not really interested in politics.
And they vote anyway? Is this the kind of person you're talking about?
Yeah.
All right, for people like that, well, it's hard to tell what they would do exactly, but my guess would be they pick the party they like or one candidate that they like and they give them the high score and ignore everybody else. And that would work perfectly fine. There's no problem with that. It doesn't hurt anything else. It's for the voters that do pay attention. It gives them a broader choice because they're the ones that are going to be thinking, you know, this candidate that not a lot of people are paying attention to, I think needs a lot more support. So let's give them the 5.
I'd like to add, can I add something to that? Because I know a lot of people that don't vote because the system is so corrupt. I think there'd be a lot of people that are like, right on, I'm gonna pay attention, and I'm gonna be involved with stuff. My vote actually might make a difference.
That would help. I'm thinking of people who are not going to vote, and they're not going to read. I mean, it took me a while to find how to ingest a vote for one person who the other blank if you want. There's so many people, they're so busy with their lives, trying to survive, support their families, they're just going to go down it is. They're just going to...
They had that same objection to ranked choice voting, which is a different system where you rank all the candidates. This is my first choice, my second choice, my third choice, and et cetera. And they thought people aren't going to know who these candidates are, especially in a city or a county race, and they know how to rank them all. But what they found out is that once people found out they had that kind of a choice, they started paying more attention, and they were making discriminating choices. So I think it's not so much that people are lazy or too busy. I think it's they're discouraged.
Yeah.
They don't have an opportunity to say what they really want. And they're not given a choice of candidates that makes them that excited. So I think once they have a different voting system in place, not everybody, but a significant number of people are going to find themselves much more interested in paying attention to who's running and what they're saying.
I think to your question too, that at the top of each ballot, with some very careful and well thought out writing, there could be some very brief instructions, probably in 3 or 4 sentences, that explain how it works, what the consequences are, what you can do.
Yep. We already have that language written up. I don't know if I could do it off the top of my head, but we do. It's something along the lines of score each candidate to how much you prefer them to win, 0 meaning no support, 5 meaning the most support. The candidates who get the 2 highest cumulative scores then advance to an instant runoff where each ballot counts for 1 vote and your vote goes to whichever one you scored higher. That's the winner. It's pretty easy.
Can I just say that the people that we really need to have vote have been doing this for about the last 10 years, Yelp reviews, Amazon reviews, they are the people that are going to use this and going to know exactly how to use it. Those are the people that are 30 and under that we really want to get involved in this.
How is this as far as the elections right now? The Republicans get 1 ballot, and the Democrats get a completely different ballot.
You're talking about the primary.
Yeah.
So, yeah, the measure that we are petitioning is only for nonpartisan county offices today. We could easily see it applying to partisan, local, and statewide offices in the future, but just to get the system up and running, get people familiar with it, we started with just the nonpartisan county offices. So it wouldn't change that fact today. But ultimately, to me, one of the real advantages is you wouldn't really, if you were to use it for statewide offices, you wouldn't need a primary election. So you could have a general election ballot with multiple competitive candidates, all espousing their particular points of view, and you as a voter could vote on all the ones that you like.
So it could work up to eventually having 1 ballot nationwide.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know about nationwide because you still got different people running in different states. I was going to add a thought to that, and it's starting to slip away already. Let's see, what were we just talking about? We were talking
partisan
about
races.
Partisan races, yeah, the primaries. Right now, the reason the primary is so important is because there's only going to be 2 major party candidates to choose from, right? In a lot of places, you really only have 1 candidate because the other party doesn't have enough support. So whoever wins that primary wins. But if you open it up to people from other parties or independent candidates, then that primary is not going to be quite as important as it is now. You're not going to have to worry about so much being excluded from the primary as, in the general election, I actually have some real choices. So you could go a number of ways with this. One way is to put everybody in one general election. Another way is to run the primaries with star voting. Another way is just say this over time will make the two parties part of history.
So two things. One, I think beginning with our next leadership meeting, we're going to take this up as an endorsement so that you guys can know
I second that.
support in this as soon as it's
Awesome.
Star that.
approval.
5 stars.
And I expect that it'll come up, it'll probably come up on December 30th for a vote on a Saturday meeting December 30th. The other thing too is I seem to recall you guys getting a commitment from the county commissioners to do a test run with this. What happened with that? Or what's the...
We asked them to do a test run. It turns out they can't actually do a public ballot test run. So what we're actually building a website that's going to be called star.vote that will let anybody run a star voting election. You'll just be able to type in the different candidates and then put it out as a link. So part of the goal in the next, before the election will be to actually give people the experience of the system.
Excellent.
When are you expecting the petition sheets to be out so we can start collecting signatures?
I think we're probably January? Yeah, middle of January.
So then what's the time frame for getting those signatures in, and then when can we start this process of experimenting with it?
My understanding is that the website version is going to be done within a week or two, so to actually try it out. But the process for petitioning, it'll start like mid-January, and then we'll have until August 11th, I believe, to get all the required signatures in. My hope is that we get the petitions before January 20th, so that when we do the big march on the 20th, on Inauguration Day, that we'll be able to collect signatures during that time.
Any other questions? Do you have meetings? Are you guys having volunteer meetings or anything like that?
Yeah, we have volunteer meetings. Occasionally, we're just getting started with bringing other people into this. In fact, we're going to be having one right after this. Or you can just contact us at the website or put your name on the list, and we'll contact you at some point, let you know when we start having regular meetings.
So just for historical sake, could you say again who originated this, and is the mainstream media in on this lately? Because this seems like a huge flipping story to me.
It's hard to say exactly who originated it because it was three people who don't agree with each other arguing, and somehow it fell out. But the three people who were involved it was Rob Ritchie, the executive director of Fair Vote, Clay Shentrup, who was one of the founders of the Center for Election Science, and myself. And when I heard, it was like Rob had the kind of original nucleus of the idea, and when I heard it, I was just like, that's a really stupid idea. And I was like, wait a second. And then I talked to Clay about it, and he's like, that's a really stupid idea. And then he was like, wait a second. And eventually, once we actually really started to look at it, and we said, wait, that could really work. So it's hard to give credit to any individual for this particular thing.
What about the media?
There've been a couple of online articles about it on like Independent Voter News, but I think once we actually get the petitions out there, then I would expect that the local media will certainly cover it. We're going to be presenting at the Unrig Summit in New Orleans at the beginning of February, and that's a big nationwide conference. So we'll definitely be getting the word out there.
Can I ask you a question about your experience of the response of people who are in the, let's say, average intelligence bracket? Because often they look at things like this as Poindexter ideas to try to get more power over someone against someone else. I heard in a talk yesterday that Americans are 39th in the world on math scores. And but at the same time, there's the same people who are brilliant at betting in Las Vegas, betting on football games. They can figure out all kind of games, you know.
So I would only say this, which is that the only people who tend to get confused by this system are like really savvy political scientists. When you show it to people, like I early on I took a sample ballot to Kinko's to make copies. The dude behind the counter was just like, "Oh, I know exactly how I'd fill this out." Gary would get my 9. This would, he just like it was. It's scoring is ubiquitous in our society, and so it really is. It's people who are heavily enmeshed in kind of politics as usual who look at it and go, "I don't know how I would game this. This system really confuses me."
Mark was too polite to say so, but I was one of those political scientists because I used to be a political science professor, and one of the early things I did when I was trying to make up my mind about this system is I started to try to figure out the ways the system could be gamed, not only by the voters, but by parties or candidates trying to add ringers to the pool of campaigners and et cetera. And I went through all these different scenarios in my mind. And I started writing them up, and I sent it to Mark, and I said, "Well, see, this is just too complicated for anybody to understand." And he said, "So what you're saying is that voting honestly is the best strategy?" And I said, "Yeah, I guess that's about it."
There's a question over there.
Just a quickie. I don't know when this was developed.
We can't hear you.
I'm assuming you drew somewhat on the
Can't hear you.
systems around the world. Sounds like it's kind of a similar goal.
Yeah. So the question was so how it was developed, and was it paying attention to like the multi-party systems in other areas, where you have actually a wide variety of political parties that all, that you can support and that people attach and that get into higher office. I mean, my suspicion is, so what creates our two-party duopoly is the way that we vote. The limit of one choice leads inevitably to two major party domination and an elimination of third-party voices. In this system, you're not penalized for supporting third parties, or fourth parties, or fifth parties. Somebody can run, and that's, I think, one of the kind of the saddest things about our current political structure is that a party like the Green Party can be looked at as a fringe, when the reality is that the majority of voters support environmental laws. The majority of voters support, sane campaign finance. The majority, the views held by some of these tiny fringe 1% parties are actually mainstream views. And the reason why they don't get to be on an equal footing is because the voting system is entirely stacked against any but the two dominant parties. And this really, it's hard to know exactly what is going to happen because this system has never been used. But the hope is that if people can vote equally and honestly, that we'll get better representation. It stands to reason.
I just thought of how this can affect the debates in the presidential election. So currently the debates are limited to candidates who get over 15% support. Well, that's because they only have one choice that they can make. So they would have to change how they do their polling on this and figure out the top scores in order to who's going to participate in the debates. And that's going to be a lot harder for them to justify keeping people out if their scores are up there with the mainstream.
Yeah.
Let me add to that. I was a candidate for Secretary of State last year, and I experienced the same kind of thing. Media just doesn't take you seriously because you don't have a lot of money and this kind of thing. So they only cover the Republican and the Democrat. You can't even get the free press to cover candidates who are not from the major parties. So how do you get your word out? How do you get your message out? You got all kind of disadvantages and hurdles you have to jump over just because the system is kind of stacked in the favor of two big parties.